We're learning that yesterday a judge in New York dismissed terrorism and first-degree felony murder charges against Luigi Mangione after the judge decided they lacked sufficient evidence. Prosecutors accused Mangione of fatally shooting, if you recall, United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson last year in Manhattan as an act of terror. ABC News chief investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky explains the judge's ruling.
Prosecutors felt they had evidence, they said, that showed Mangione wanted to send a wider message and coerce the public. They pointed to writings that police said they found on Mangione when he was arrested in Pennsylvania. But the defense said Mangione himself never actually publicized any of his writings. That was done by the authorities. And the judge said there was just insufficient evidence to conclude that he meant the killing as a wider message to the public.
That's interesting to me, and I wonder how that applies to the current case we've been discussing.
Yeah, right. Yes, very much so. And because I'll tell you, with the current case we're discussing, if the federal government wanted to come in and prosecute the crime that occurred at UVU last week, they wouldn't just charge a murder because Utah's already got that. Federal law would allow for them to charge it as an act of terrorism, which is exactly what we're talking about here. Yeah. Because Luigi Mangione was charged with 3 counts. Now, the third count sticks, but the first 2 counts, which include that are both terrorism-related counts, murder in the course of an act of terrorism, and another one that as a crime of terrorism. So, in furtherance of an act of terrorism and murder as a crime of terrorism. In other words,
that sounds similar to me, but
and then just murder. Yeah. So he's charged with 3 counts. But the word terrorism is what got the state in trouble. So make no mistake, Luigi Mangione is still charged with murder. He's still facing a very significant penalty. But there often when we have crimes, we have a hook. Like for example, if you assault somebody, it's a crime. But if you assault somebody you live with, we call it a crime involving domestic violence. Right. If you assault an individual that you see near your car, that's a crime. But if you assault them because they're African American, that's a crime related to their race. Right. So in this case, the government tried to enhance the penalty. They tried to make the murder more serious, saying it was an act of terrorism. And the defense said, it's not an act of terrorism. He killed a CEO of a company because he didn't like what they were doing. He wasn't trying to send the greater message that that he's a terrorist. And I know the decision is 12 pages long, and I've been trying to read it here. But I think the same would apply to Tyler Robinson here in Utah. And you make a good question: is that an act of domestic terrorism? If you recall, Timothy McVeigh blows up the Oklahoma City government
federal
center,
building.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was an act of terrorism. He used a bomb because he blew up a government institution. In neither of these cases is it the CEO of a healthcare, United Healthcare, Charlie Kirk, who's a conservative activist. They're not. It's not an act against the government. I mean, you could say it kind of is.
Is that what terrorism is, though? The definition is an act against government. I don't know. I'm asking you as the legal expert.
Not exactly, but it's an act intended to
strike terror into somebody's heart.
Right. Yes, with the intent to cause. They have a definition of it here. The definition in New York is to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence a policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. In other words, intimidate the civilian population. Were either of these acts intended to intimidate the civilian, like a message to the civilian population?
Well, I'm not an attorney, but I could argue maybe yes.
Yeah, you could. And they argued that in New York and lost. But you're right. Yeah. Influence the policy of a unit of government. Influence the policy of a unit of government. We're considering passing a law that legalizes abortion. Right. Okay, then you commit some act that to influence the
policy,
or affects the conduct of a unit of government. Yeah. In other words, Congress is about to get back in session, and that you commit some act, or January 6th.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We do have a texter that says whether it's terrorism or not, it was cold-blooded murder and should be first degree. It was planned, premeditated, so why? So you said he's still charged with murder, right?
Right.
Is he charged with some kind of a lesser count of murder?
Yes.
Okay, so what's he charged with?
So he's charged with second-degree murder, which is just
Why?
well,
I do agree. Why?
because cold-blooded doesn't come into it.
Okay.
So Utah is very much the same. And by the way, we used to have first-degree murder and second-degree murder. We now call it aggravated murder and murder.
Yeah.
The reason is because first-degree murder was an aggravated offense and second-degree murder was a first-degree felony, and it confused everyone.
Right.
So New York still does
Exactly.
it the old way.
Okay.
They still call it second-degree murder. So murder is murder, and it carries life in prison.
Okay.
And in Utah, it carries 25
New
years
York
to
doesn't
life.
have the death penalty, do they?
Correct.
Okay.
But they can say if it's a aggravated murder, like what Robinson is charged with.
Right.
Aggravated murder occurs in Utah. So the county attorney there had to look at the book and say,
Right.
okay, how can I make this murder into an aggravated murder? And really mean or thinking about it first, or you're evil person is not in the book.
Right.
And people always think premeditation. That word doesn't exist anymore
Okay.
under the law. Everybody think, well, even my son, he was like, Dad, it was a premeditated murder. Like, so what? So murder is murder, and it's serious, and you go to prison for the rest of your life. But if you want to make it aggravated murder, or you want to make it a terrorism act, you have to prove
There
that
are certain
predicate
things.
crime. Like
Uh-huh.
the aggravation in the Robinson case that the state has alleged is what they're saying is that, and you have to look in the book, you have to look at any of the 26 aggravating factors. His is that his act created a grave risk of death or a great risk of death to someone other than the person killed. Did that gunshot create a great risk of death to anyone other than Charlie Kirk?
Right. And we've talked about that, and the answer
Right.
seems to be yes. There were 3,000 people there, including children.
It went over the heads of
Right.
thousands of people, and
Right.
there were apparently, from what we're learning today, people literally standing right
Yeah.
in front of him.
Right.
So I think that's a good hook, and I think that's a good basis for Jeff Gray to file that case as a death penalty case. New York, they're saying, well, he murdered this CEO, and it was a terrorist act. He did it. He's a terrorist.
Right.
And the judge said, well, under our definition of terrorism, he's not affecting the operation of the government. He's not affecting the civilian population. It's not like he's like, oh, everybody's afraid to walk around the streets now because Luigi Mangione is killing the United Healthcare CEO.
Yeah.
You know, it was a message crime. It was directed to
I think there was some celebration when that happened too, actually, if I remember
and
correctly.
unfortunately, yeah. And unfortunately, we're hearing it in different respects in
Yeah.
what happened here in Utah, which is just pathetic. But anyway, murder is murder, and it should be, and it is punished, and he will be punished, and he's still going to trial, but he's not facing the other two counts related to the terrorist act.
So let me ask you this. Is terrorism a federal charge, and would that come into play in Utah? So I have another texter. Isn't UVU a government entity? Should it be? It should be considered terrorism, they think.
And that's a great question. It very well may be.
And is that federal only, though, or is it state?
Yeah, Utah does not have a terrorism as a hook, and it's murder. An act of terrorism is not an aggravating circumstance.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that this would qualify, but that's a great question. Was this an act of domestic terrorism? I think the local case is a better act of terrorism than the Mangione case. If I were a judge or a prosecutor looking at those two cases and saying, hey, which one has the better? That's a brilliant question that your listener says, that talks about that, because what is terrorism and what do we do about that? Well, what we do is we say it makes the crime bad, but it's worse because you did it with this awful, bigger picture that you're trying to get accomplished.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I wonder if there might be legislation that comes forward that either adds that to the local, or if it's always a federal nexus on that one.
Right. Even people ask, well, this is an assassination. Well, under Utah law,
right,
it wasn't, because assassination is limited under Utah law to elected officials or those who are running for political office.
Which is interesting, right? Because I told you, like, the commonly understood definition is it can be celebrity or otherwise can be considered assassination. That word has been used a lot, but I wonder if that definition might be expanded.
I'm betting the Utah legislature changes the law.
I bet it might be talking about that.